All right, so a lot of people in the audience, I'm sure, are very familiar with Google's Moonshot Factory. For those who aren't, just give us the 30-second mission.
So the mission is to invent and launch moonshot technologies that can make the world a radically better place. But we absolutely work at the intersection of purpose and profit. The goal, for sure, is to create profitable, enduring businesses.
Okay. We don't usually have slides at our summits, but I think when you're talking about moonshot technology, seeing some visuals is super helpful. So let's tee up a couple of the projects you all have been working on. Tell us what we're looking at.
Absolutely. So what you're looking at is one of the earliest prototypes of a Waymo car. So again,
how many people have ridden in a Waymo in this room? Nice.
Wonderful. Okay. I hope it was a great experience for everyone. So what was the problem we were trying to solve with Waymo? There's about 1 million deaths on roads every single year. And so our goal was to see whether we could actually take some of the decision making and put it into a computer. And so you look at Waymo now, and I think they've driven 100 million miles on roads to date, and they're serving about 250,000 rides every single week, and we expect that to continue. So I'm super excited. They're already in multiple cities, and we're just going to see much more expansion.
I told you my story about riding in the first one. I was terrified until I got in, and then I didn't want to get out. All right, moving
Me too.
on. Yeah, all right, same, ditto. What am I looking at here?
All right, so this is from Wing. So this is our drone delivery service. Essentially, there's a lot of friction in last mile delivery. You know, you've got massive traffic on roads, friction in terms of timing to actually get goods to where you want them to be. And so Wing has launched a delivery service, and they're actually partnering with Walmart, where you can literally get on an app and have goods delivered to your door in a matter of minutes. I mean, we're talking about literally 15 minutes. You can have something, whether it's like groceries or pharmaceuticals or whatever you may want.
You just did it recently?
I did. So I was in the Dallas-Fort Worth, Texas area, and I had a Starbucks coffee delivered by drone. I literally just went to my phone and got a bottle of Starbucks, and it was delivered.
That's for tomorrow night at the CFO dinner, Alan.
There
That's
we go.
ROI.
That there.
You've got your moment coming up, right? Look at the ROI. Did it spill? Was it not?
Oh, well, no. So it was one of the bottles.
One of the bottles. Okay.
But I will say, like another example with Wing. Actually, what you're looking at in this picture is downtown London, where the Wing drone was actually delivering blood samples from hospital to hospital over the city. And for those of you that remember Hurricane Helene, there were areas where roads were completely inaccessible, and so people really needed baby formula or medical supplies, whatever it may be, and so they partnered with Walmart to actually get those supplies delivered. Yeah.
Pretty amazing. Let's stay in the air here.
Yes, let's stay in the air. So this is from Loon. So this was our communications project. So again, like 1/3 of people around the globe still remain unconnected. And we all know that there are better health outcomes, educational outcomes, economic outcomes when people have connectivity. And so this is a sort of balloon that would fly in the stratosphere and basically be able to beam connectivity between the balloons and then down to the ground. But I think this is an interesting one that we actually included here, because even though we were working on the right problem space, connectivity, and even though the technology worked, we couldn't actually get the techno-economics to work.
But this led to the next one we're going to see.
Exactly. So this led to the next one. And this is, by the way, part of our whole philosophy at X, the Moonshot Factory, where even if we try something and it doesn't work in the sort of form that we approach, we don't just throw out what we've learned completely. We'll often go back to the drawing board and take those learnings and see whether they can be reinvented. We essentially called it like Moonshot compost. We basically compost the ideas and then see whether a new idea can grow. And so this is an image of from a project called Tara, a company now called Tara, which actually just recently spun out of Google X. And they are basically
an engineer from Loon is working on this,
So
correct?
we had an engineer and some other members of the Loon team. So you're right, it's not even just sort of the IP and the know-how that gets sort of composted. It's also team members that will switch over, which, by the way, is actually a really important point in terms of inspiring people, because if you're working on a moonshot idea and there's a high probability that it's not going to work out, you want people to still work on it and give it a try. And one of the ways that we can actually inspire people to go for it anyway is if they know that the thing they're working on has the potential to have a second life. And so that's exactly what happened here. So the team at Tara is now serving communities with sort of high-speed internet in India and in Africa and throughout the Americas as well. So I'm really excited about the work that they're doing.
Very last one, and then...
All right, so this last one is our moonshot in the realm of agriculture. So we all care deeply about food security and making sure that we can feed the planet sustainably even as population is growing. And so the idea here was, as farmers are trying to get information about their fields and sort of optimize yields, the idea we had was, can we actually help them manage their crops instead of at the sort of field by field level, really down to the individual plant level. And so we wanted to see whether it was possible to really understand information about an individual plant. And so the team put together these rovers and just put them out into the fields just to see whether it was even possible to get valuable information. And the goal was to help them sort of estimate crop yield so they can make a better decision on when to harvest. They can use less water, maybe use fewer sort of pesticides, and basically sort of grow more sustainably. But I love this image because it is one of the earliest prototypes that we built. And I think this is a good example of sort of the approach that we take, where we're really focused on learning as quickly as possible and experimenting as quickly as possible. So the team, so we actually have what's called a design kitchen, which is kind of a cross between like a makerspace and a lab. And there's a group of people there who have extraordinary backgrounds, and anyone at X can basically jot down on the back of a napkin even an idea for a prototype, and this team will grab off-the-shelf parts and in a matter of days put a prototype together. And that's exactly what they did in this image. So they took apart a bicycle and slapped these bicycle wheels onto a metal frame, and then they got sort of off-the-shelf cameras and attached them and then hooked it up to a laptop and just pushed it out into the field just to see whether the idea was even possible. And we wanted to learn as quickly as possible whether there's a there, so that we can then make a determination, do we continue to invest or do we actually pull back? And
this all starts, and I want now to take you to pull back, because I'm not sure, everybody's probably thinking innovation at Moonshot, right? You've got the labs and the napkins and people who can spin out prototypes. It's a whole different situation than many companies, but there have to be lessons within that any company, anybody sitting in this room can take away. To some extent, what you're talking about, being able to have a forum to solicit ideas and act upon them. That's at the core of what you're talking about. Tell us what innovation tactics from Moonshot, from X, can people in this room actually borrow from?
So a reminder, our focus is really on inspiring radical innovation. And we really want our teams to have an innovation mindset. And I think that's part of what you're sort of talking about. And so there's a bunch of things that we do to really inspire that way of thinking. Actually, before I get into that, the one thing I will say is that I think the best way to think about the sort of moonshot mindset is through the sort of quote from Thomas Edison that hopefully you're familiar with. I have not failed, I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work. And I think that really gets to the heart of what it truly means to be innovative. He understood that the only way to achieve the truly audacious is to be brave enough to try and to be willing to make lots of mistakes along the way.
And to not get fired if you do.
And to not get fired, well, and then that's the key. And so those are some of the practices. And so we're trying to inspire the same with a team, is to have a humble growth mindset, and yet at the same time be really curious and passionate and go after really hard things and be okay facing sort of complete uncertainty about what they do. So how do we get people to aspire to do difficult things? So one example I would give is, traditionally in companies, you're setting goals, and all in sort of incentives and compensation is tied to did they hit the goal or not exactly as defined. But when you're sort of pursuing radical innovation, you don't even know if the goal that you hit is the right goal to set. And quite frequently there's a very low probability that the thing you're actually working on is going to work. And so if you only reward hitting the goal, what are people going to do? They're going to lower their ambition. And that's the last thing that we want. So instead, we really focus on how do we reward the learnings and the journey and the fact that they actually tried something difficult.
What's an example of how you would reward a learning journey?
I mean, so we have, well, this actually gets to sort of on this point around learnings, we lean into everybody sharing their learnings. And so people will literally get on stage in front of the whole company and talk about, hey, I tried this really difficult thing, and here's what worked, and here's what didn't work, and here's how I pivoted. And people will even get bonused for having tried a really hard thing and then having taught the rest of us about what did or did not work. Another practical example is, we have audacious challenges every single quarter. So people will share what are the really, really hard things, like what is the Gordian knot that they're going after. But that can feel really scary if you're working on like a hard thing, sharing it with everybody. But if everybody is publicly sharing, here's the really difficult thing I'm working on, there's probably a 5-10% chance that we actually hit it, but I'm going for it anyway, and I'm really focused on what I can learn. That can inspire everybody around you to sort of raise their ambitions and think about what are hard things they can work on. And then we'll come back at the end of the quarter, and to your point again, like, how do we reward it? Well, we're getting everybody to come to the table and actually share with the whole company, here's what we learned, here's what worked, here's what didn't work.
When I grabbed you in the hall earlier and we were just kind of talking through what we wanted to discuss up here, I talked about innovation, and she quickly said to me, but there's also process. And I said, oh, like a true CFO. But I want you to, because this was important enough for you to say that to me. So you describe all of these creative avenues. How do you bring process to the, I don't want to call it madness, but the sort of, we imagine all these scientists running around, like how do you make process around it?
Yeah, let me start by saying it's a really delicate balancing act. You have to have enough like belief in the impossible and sort of head in the clouds and like looking at over the horizon. And at the same time, to your point around process, if that's untethered, you can just imagine like people, scientists like doing anything and everything. And so my job, a lot of my job is finding that balance between head in the clouds and then feet on the ground. And so to your question about process, we have, we call ourselves a Moonshot Factory, and that's a deliberate choice of words because we're actually really working on how do we systematize innovation? How do we repeatedly go after really hard things? And so we have a very rigorous and efficient process, and efficiency is a really important part of this. It could be very easy to waste a lot of money really quickly. Yeah. So a lot of what I'm focused on is think of it almost like a funnel. At the earliest stages, we will have lots and lots of ideas that people are coming up with, and they're trying to figure out what is going to work, what's not going to work. And so there's rapid iterations, rapid experimentation and prototyping. And then what I and sort of the leadership team are really watching is what did we learn, and to what extent has that either given us greater confidence or less confidence that we're able to prove or disprove our hypothesis.
And how do you decide that? Like, what is your measurement?
So we set business, technical, and financial milestones every step of the way. And so they need to be stage appropriate. Obviously, it's very different early stage versus late stage. And then the other thing we do, particularly around the business milestones, is we're not inventing in a vacuum. Yeah. So engagement with partners is absolutely critical. So even from the earliest stages right the way through to later stage where we've got a true product and commercialize and we're bringing in revenue, we are working with partners. So even at the ideation stage, we'll talk to partners and really understand what are the problems that they're experiencing and how can a technological solution actually help solve that problem? And then we will iterate. And so that is also part of what gives me confidence. If we're getting real-time feedback from partners who are saying we are or not solving that problem, that also gives me confidence. But it does tend to be very much milestone focused.
That's such an important point, right? You're not sort of doing it in a vacuum. You're actually trying to solve a real problem that's existing there. And I think all companies need to think about that in terms of what their audience is, what their audience needs, solving those points. I have to ask you this. I know you're CFO and Chief Operating Officer now as well. But I'm thinking back to the days when I worked in the consumer reports labs and all the strange things we would buy to test products, like we'd fly in Maine Coon cat hair to test the vacuums. But this is Google, right? So I cannot, what are some of the weirdest things you've ever had to sign off on purchasing at Moonshot?
Gosh, there's so many examples. The one that definitely comes to mind is actually nuclear fusion. And part of the reason when I first heard about it, the picture I had in my head is, gosh, this is going to take dozens of people and like tens of millions of dollars, and like thinking about the risk. And I think what really struck me again is this whole focus on efficiency. Like we were able to pursue a nuclear fusion project with fewer people than the number of fingers on my hands and a relatively small amount of money. And the team was actually able to build a nuclear fusion reactor in a warehouse. And it was inspired by some research that had been done in Los Alamos, I think in the 60s and 70s. And so there was a lot of theory, but they didn't have the tools to be able to test that theory. And so it was exciting that we are at a stage now where the tools are now available, and we even partnered with some of those original scientists to figure out like how we would pursue it. And so it didn't cost that much. The other thing, I know there's a lot of focus on sort of ROI, and I think the calculus here was like, do we invest in it or not?
Yeah.
It's especially when you've got like less than a 1% chance of something actually working. You may question like, is it worth the investment? But if it had worked, you can just think about like the value creation potential, and that is exactly the kind of risk that we're willing to take at X. And so long as we can keep investment tight and be really efficient in our process, it is absolutely worth it to take those kinds of risks.
I'd like to walk around there and see the things that you've signed off on: food waste, molten salt, right? Trash.
Yes.
I know Ben had to step out for a minute, but I think he mentioned there were some couple of questions that might be in the audience already. I think Shandu Nair, is Shandu still here? Yeah, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I'm going to change up the question that I told Ben, but Helen, I had the opportunity to meet Astro Teller, a couple of years ago. Fascinating 40 minutes of my life, I should say. Just nobody has and I run the innovation labs at Lowe's, so we partner with you guys quite a bit on a few of these ideas. But if I remember and I'm not sure if what he shared is public knowledge or not, but he goes with this high conviction ideas as swim lanes to go experiment, right? So there are things 10 years out that could change. And I'm curious to say, how do you, those seem to be like the guardrails by which experimentations happen, just like some of the examples that you highlighted, last mile delivery being one. How do you set a financial model around it? Because there could be 100 different experiments before you kind of say, hey, I got to pick a drone as kind of the best last mile option. Or you have to try three different things. So I'm curious to say, how do you take someone like high conviction, long-term ideas, things that are probably not invented so far, but you're trying to experiment your way to invent it and try to create a financial budgeting, operational models around it. So just curious to see how that comes to life.
Yeah. I think there's a couple of parts to the question. First is like, generally, how do we decide what we're going to work on? And so we kind of have a blueprint for every moonshot idea. And this also speaks to sort of the opportunity and the potential for financial returns. We're literally looking at massive problem spaces. So everything that we work on starts with identifying a huge problem in the world, something that if we can solve it could improve the lives of millions or billions of people around the planet. And if that's happening, then the assumption is that we can absolutely sort of generate revenue from it. Then we're looking at a radical solution to the problem, something that doesn't exist today. And that's where it's a little tricky, because if it doesn't exist today, it's not like you can look at a pre-existing financial metrics around sort of the market and how it works, because in some cases we're trying to create a new market or totally expand a market that doesn't exist. And then we're working on the breakthrough technology, which is sort of our sort of special sauce that we're bringing to the table. So everything that we work on captures those three things. So yeah, in terms of financial analyses, absolutely we're looking at, TAM, SAM, and SOM. So like, what is the serviceable addressable market? But there are so many assumptions that go into that when you're working on a brand new technology, and when you're actually coming up with a radical solution that could fundamentally shift the market. So we have to make our best guess on what those assumptions are. And then again, going through this rigorous process, we're trying to get feedback from our partners. And then as we're able to narrow it down, we'll have slightly higher degrees of confidence. But we're starting with something big. So yes, the probability may be sort of very low to begin with. But as we continue to de-risk, as we validate some of our assumptions, then the analysis gets tighter over time. But in the earlier stages, it is part art and part science for sure.
That's a good question. Thank you. Is there anybody else who had a question in the room? If not, I want to, first of all, I asked her, you were a philosophy major? What else?
Philosophy, politics, and economics was my undergrad.
And I said, so what do you have to major in to work at Moonshot? And who are you? I mean, you said it's all over the place.
It really is. I think one of our fundamental strengths is really having interdisciplinary teams. Like, I think that is so important. I mean, we all know that diversity of experiences, diversity of thinking is actually incredibly important. Because when you bring people together with different perspectives and different experiences, that's actually where the magic happens. Because when they're asking each other questions from very different viewpoints, it can actually break people out of ruts in a way that enables them to generate ideas that are more sort of unusual and unconventional and sort of creative than I think would otherwise be possible. And so when you look at a lot of our moonshots, AI and machine learning expertise underpins almost everything that we do, but then they may be partnered with roboticists and other domains. So Tidal is our sort of moonshot for ocean health. And so we actually have, in addition to sort of roboticists and ML experts, we actually have an aquanaut who lived underwater on a mission with
everybody has one of those, right? An aquanaut,
and a marine biologist. And so when you actually put these sorts of teams together, they'll just come up with ideas that, from a single discipline you would never even have come up with. The other example that you and I talked about is for robots. So we have, robots that are sort of wandering through our buildings. So yes, you've got ML experts and roboticists, but we actually had someone who has experience as a dance choreographer who was partnering with them to help them figure out how best to navigate through the cluttered world of humans. So we fundamentally believe that these sort of multidisciplinary teams are the way to really unlock the best ideas.
And yesterday in the workshop, the women's workshop, we were all just talking about majors and critical thinking. I was talking over coffee with my colleague Ben in the back, who's also he's a professor. We were talking about just critical thinking in general and majors. And I think what you're describing is, even in this world of technology, the human critical thinking piece is so important to the magic of what you guys are doing at Moonshot.
I couldn't agree more. I think technology is absolutely going to augment what we can do, but it's the human critical thinking that is going to be the unlock of magic when it comes to new ideas.
So we've got 3 minutes. I want to know two things. One, you've got these people with these grand ideas and you make this investment and they're so passionate, and then at some point you put it through the process and the matrix and you decide, we can't go forward with it. Well, first of all, how do you make that call? And then how do you deliver the news about that call to somebody without sort of the total demoralization of them?
I'm not going to say it's easy.
Yeah.
Every single time we have this conversation, it's a really hard thing for anyone who's been working on something and putting their sort of blood, sweat, and tears into it. It can be a really hard thing to let go. That said, from day one, we've been very, very clear with everybody in the organization. They know full well that the thing they're working on may or may not work out. Yeah. But from their perspective, I think that if it doesn't look like it's going to work, I'm not sure that they also want to spend time sort of wasting their time on a thing if they don't believe that it can actually become this successful, enduring business in the real world. So even though there's the pain there, there's the setup of expectations and the recognition that that if it's not going to go forward, it's probably the best thing. And the Loon to Tara example that we talked about, they still have the opportunity to go work on something different. And then in terms of making the decision, again, it really comes down to like the milestones that we're looking at, and it's business, technical, and financial milestones. You know, we are very focused on the techno-economics, and if it doesn't look like it's going to work out,
Yeah.
we'll walk away.
So that's how the process underpins
Yes.
or balances out rather the innovation and creativity. And I think that knowing, this is, I think this works for everybody in this room, but like having people who are so talented know they're going to have a landing spot afterward, right? That if they don't have to cling to the project and keep trying to fight for it or hold it, because there's another place for them to end up where they can do something powerful as well. I asked you to pick one of your favorite children before we came out here, and I said, Jim, to pick one, but you picked Waymo, but I want you to pick another one.
I will.
Okay.
I will. So, gosh, there are so many to choose from. We actually just unveiled a new one yesterday, so you're going to be one of the first to sort of hear about it. So it's called A-Life, and it's in the sort of realm of synthetic biology. So when you think about manufacturing right now, a lot of manufacturing obviously is happening in sort of plants, putting together chemicals to create products. What I'm really excited about is if you can actually think about a cell as a manufacturing unit. And so imagine you could essentially grow in a cell any product that you might need, any sort of material. You know, it could be, even like clothing or biofuels or detergent, or it could even be consumables like human milk sugar that could end up in baby formula. I mean, the possibilities are endless. And so we've been working on this for several years, and I'm super excited that they've got a number of partners who are working with them now, and it is helping them sort of increase yields and reduce costs dramatically. So very excited about
Thank you for sharing that with us today. I'm sure everybody here wants a tour the next time they're in town. I'll be knocking at your door. Thank you so much.